welcome. I'm Daniel G. Garza, and this is another episode of Put It Together Conversations. Welcome to the show. I'd like to welcome all our friends on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember to share this show with your friends. If you're watching us on YouTube, do us a favor. We do scroll down, hit that subscribe button, and like this video. That really helps us out. Put It Together Conversations is a show about folks, about you, where you come from, where you are now, and what the journey is like. And the idea is to motivate and inspire other people to go after their dreams and goals. And I hope that today's conversation inspires you in some way. My guest today is, Professor on Food Policy, Mr. Darin Detwiler. And let me tell you a little bit about him. He's an author, columnist, industry consultant, keynote speaker, and professor on food policy. Founder and CEO of Detwiler Consulting Group, U.S. Navy Nuclear Submarine Veteran. Dr. Detwiler is an internationally recognized and respected food policy expert with over 25 years' experience in shaping federal food policy, consulting with corporations, contributing through leadership to the food industry, and addressing food safety and authenticity issues in the U.S. and abroad. In 2018, the International Association for Food Protection presented Dr. Detwiler with the Distinguished Service Award sponsored by Food Safety Magazine for his unparalleled achievement across various advisory, advocacy, educational, editorial, and leadership committees related to food policy. So without more, let me bring him on stage, Mr. Detwiler. Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. So good to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For those of you following the show and always wondering how I met my guests, we first met on Lunch Club. For those of you who are not familiar with Lunch Club, it is a social site where it matches you up with people within your industry or with similar interest, and you can randomly pick, which is what I do, to just have the machine match you up with people. And I was lucky enough to be matched up with Dr. Darin, and here we are talking. We actually talked for a long time that day, which was really interesting.
We did, and I think that it's for me, when you look at here we were in the middle of a pandemic when we connected, and we weren't necessarily able to engage in the same networking circles and events and activities that we normally do. But at the same time, I think that we sometimes fall, I don't want to say victim, but we fall into this rut in terms of, we always go to the same events. We always kind of end up meeting the same kind of people. There's not a lot of opportunities out there for people to network with people with vastly different interests or missions or priorities or backgrounds. And that was one of the things that I was really enjoying in our conversation, was just hearing about your story, not just telling my story, but then trying to figure out, how to gain something from that experience. And that led us to here today.
Yeah. And for those of you that don't know Lunch Club much, I will post my links on the Put It Together Conversations pages so you guys can check them out, and it'll link you to it. I have to admit, I've been on there since like October of last year, and I've had the pleasure of just meeting some amazing people. And those of you who follow Put It Together Conversations know that some of the people that I've met on Lunch Club have been guests on the show. So it's for me, it's not just a way to get to know people; it's to network and bring them on the show, and then share with my audience. So it's really interesting. But I'm so glad you're here. It's been such a positive site to be on. Like you say, when you can't network and you can't go somewhere, have the site bring people to you that you can connect with. It's really awesome. It's really awesome. Yeah. Now, I know we have a lot to talk about because your name, I'm going to say it this way, your name spans across different boxes, let's put it that way. So I want to make sure that people hear your stories. So Dr. Darin Detwiler, tell us how you put it together.
Sure. I think it all comes down to the idea of following your passion, following what means something to you. I'm a professor, and I work with students, undergrad, graduate, doctoral candidates. And I used to be a high school teacher and even a middle school teacher. And, one thing I've told people time after time again, is that you can have many jobs over your lifetime. I think there's like a national average of, like, the national average of how many times a person's moved in their life, the national average of how many jobs people will have in their lifetime, kind of a thing. And, it is okay for you to have jobs that are completely unrelated. It's also okay for you to, at some point, find what is it about when you're at work, when you're investing your time and energy and your focus, what is it that means something to you? What is it that at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about how much you made personally, or how much you made for your company, or how many products you shipped necessarily. Those are not the only ways we can measure what we do. But perhaps finding what is of meaning to you, and how you feel that you contribute, whether it's to your own satisfaction, to others' satisfaction, or to others' life, whatever it is, that's probably the number one thing in terms of putting it together. As you can see, even just by the various things behind my desk here, um, these seem randomly, you know, they seem rather random and
Mhm.
unconnected. But there are different things that I've learned that age has given me the opportunity to be able to find what is that common thread through that fabric or tapestry that is my career. And without going into two tons of detail, I really enjoy trying to explain, especially to younger students, to younger people, um, but even as I try to motivate others, um, through my stories, through my writing, put some observations together. Um, One of the things that I look back on as being influential, I remember in the 1970s, there was the 3 Mile Island incident. Do you remember that? Um, in Pennsylvania, there was a nuclear reactor that had a meltdown, had a radiation leak, and President Carter at the time, um, he left Washington D.C. and went out to the reactor, and actually went into the reactor control room. And now, mind you, you need to know that he used to be a nuclear engineer in the Navy on a submarine. Um, and talk about timing. A nuclear incident happens while he's a president. He just happens to have this background and this knowledge and these connections. It left me obviously with this impression about leadership, but it also left me with this notion of invisible danger. This idea that radiation is this invisible danger. Um, I also look back at the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion from the mid 80s. And this was a wake up call for me in terms of, regardless of all the science and technology out there, we are still vulnerable. There's no guarantee. So it should be no surprise that after high school, I joined the Navy and I served on a nuclear submarine. I was a nuclear engineer, perhaps influenced by President Carter. And I served during the Cold War and the first Gulf War. And right after I served in the military, I went from being active duty to being in the reserves. And an incident took place that completely caught me off guard. I was 24 years old. Um, so, like most 24-year-olds, you think you're immortal. Um, and I was just off of operating a nuclear reactor in a submarine, so I thought I was pretty smart. And there was this E. coli outbreak, this foodborne pathogen, tied to hamburgers at a fast food restaurant. If you're on the West Coast, you might have heard of Jack in the Box, although it's not a nationwide. It's a fast food hamburger place, like a Burger King or McDonald's. And I found out about this, and it was kind of one of those, well, we'll avoid eating hamburgers. We'll avoid eating a Jack in the Box. This is one of those things that happens to them. What's the worst that could happen? And I had a 16-month-old son at the time who showed symptoms. He showed symptoms immediately after we got a notification at his daycare that there was another kid who was sick and tested positive with E. coli. And we took my wife and I took our son to the doctor. He was seen. Um, it took about 48 hours for test results to come back. When they came back, he tested positive for E. coli, but his symptoms were getting worse. And ultimately, he went from being seen by the doctor to being admitted to being in the pediatric ward to being airlifted to Children's Hospital in Seattle to going having exploratory surgery in which he had the majority of his intestines removed, and he was placed in a medically induced coma, and he just deteriorated. And literally less than 4 weeks after his symptoms, uh, and learning about this, um, you know, where was this going? And just like the 3 Mile Island, and just like the Space Shuttle Challenger, there's certain memories I'll never forget, holding him on my lap, and he didn't recognize. I mean, he saw an IV bag on a pole, clear with liquid and some markings on there, and he would call for it. He would kind of reach for it and say "Baba," which was his word for bottle. I remember seeing him being put into the helicopter to be airlifted to Children's Hospital. I remember having a hard time looking for him in his hospital bed. I mean, just completely, he's a 16-month-old boy, and he's completely dwarfed by wires and tubes and monitors and machinery and so much medical equipment. Um, and then seeing him again outside the hospital being carried in the world's smallest white coffin. Um, these are not these are not the experiences that one should have. These are not the experiences that we don't train for. We don't learn about these things. We don't predict these things. We don't tell a story of our life and here's what's going to happen down the road and have a clause. What if this happens? Kind of a thing. We don't, as parents, we don't think about outliving our children. We don't think about learning about something like E. coli on our child's deathbed, and we don't wish this upon anyone else. So I was kind of faced with this scenario, this idea of, what do you do with this? And I've decided a couple things. Initially, I decided that I had an option. I could either ignore this, pack this away, don't focus on this, don't really interact with people on this, or I could make a difference. Perhaps try to prevent another parent from living with a chair forever empty at their family table. And I couldn't ask other people to do something that I wasn't willing to do. That was the whole reason why I went into the Navy. I thought I'm going to join the Navy, and I'm going to try to make this world a better place, secure the nation, whatever you want to say, kind of a thing, so that my children wouldn't have to, kind of a thing. So I kind of looked at that in terms of myself. But there's a couple other things over the last 3 decades that I have really kind of focused on as well. One is this idea of building a legacy for my son. At the same time, I don't want to be defined by that incident, that event in 1993, but I would rather be defined by what I did as a result of this. How did I react? How did I put it together, if you will, in terms of what to do with that? And I think finally, just to kind of close this bit of the conversation, um, it took a while for me to kind of, I guess, have the courage to say this, perhaps. But you know, yes, I lost my son. However, the ultimate measure of failure, I guess, to me is, you know, did my son lose his father? No, my son did not lose his father. And so, how do you continue to be a father or a friend or a relative to someone who is no longer with us? And perhaps it's being an advocate, being telling that person's story, trying to prevent other people from experiencing what in this case my son experienced, trying to improve the human condition, trying to improve America's food supply, whatever it is, trying to help the next generation of leaders and decision makers and policymakers when it comes to food better understand the true burden of disease, the true why behind what we really do. It's not just return on investment. It's not just statistics and numbers and bar graphs and pie charts. There are real humans, real stories, real faces, real families that are living with the consequences of bad decisions. And so that is in a introductory, I guess, nutshell, how I decided to put it together, if you will, after that event almost 3 decades ago.
That's really interesting. I want to remind everybody you're watching Putting Together Conversations. I'm your host, Daniel G. Garza. My guest today is Professor on Food Policy, Dr. Darin Detwiler. And we're talking about what got him motivated and starting his journey in food policy. So now, did you already have some kind of background in
No,
food or in that
no.
aspect before all this?
Um, I at that time I have eaten a lot of food and cooked a lot of food, but I had never really worked much in the arena of food. In the aftermath of that event, I went back to university. I earned degrees in history and civics and education. I thought that being a teacher along the way was going to be a good way to help with my efforts, and then I ultimately earned a doctorate in law and policy um, that allows me to really focus more on the policy and the obviously the legal and policy side of things, and it has all these different degrees plus my background in journalism and in policy. I've It's been one of those things where I've been able to pull together a lot of my research, a lot of my, well, yeah, my research, but also my background experiences and different hats that I've worn to be able to, to do what I do right now.
So once you get your degree, what was your mission? Did you have a strategy of the direction you wanted to go in?
Well, really kind of to flip the script on this, I was doing this work. I didn't get my master's degree or my degrees in education or law and policy until almost years and even decades after I started
Oh,
working on
wow.
this.
Okay.
Right after my son died, I started working with the media and even working with the USDA, helping the USDA make some improvements in terms of consumer education and to support some policy changes. Um, I ended up I was appointed to and served 2 terms as a special advisor to the Secretary of Agriculture, really trying to represent the consumer perspective. And while I was continuing to earn my different degrees and gain my experience in these different arenas, I have served as a senior policy coordinator for a major nonprofit organization that focuses on food safety. I have worked with the USDA and the FDA and many different organizations, and I've been speaking. Writing and speaking a great deal well before I even earned my doctorate. My doctorate was in this area and it added to it. In fact, my doctorate, if I can show my book, well, it's right there too. It's on my wall.
Yes.
My doctorate is a good portion of my doctorate came into my first book, food safety past, present, and predictions. And I think that along the way, the biggest thing that I really learned is that it's one thing to put it together for yourself, and it's one thing to try to tell someone, this is what you need to do, kind of a thing. It's another thing to be really confident in yourself and capable to be a storyteller, if you will, to be this, whether it's as an inspiration or motivational person, or to really kind of put that why behind a story. And that's one of the things I've really focused on a great deal in my book, Food Safety Past, Present, Predictions. How do you tell this story? And so many books are written that's just, and then this passed and here's the citation, and then this happened and here's the citation. They were kind of missing the real voices and the real story. How did the participants help put this law together? How do they help put this investigation together? How do they solve this scenario? To really understand, the human condition behind these. And even recently, I a week ago, I went to Phoenix, Arizona for a conference. And it's very easy. This was a food safety conference. It's very easy to talk about, E. coli, Salmonella, Listeria as the bad guy, the villain, if you will. What are we against? We're against the villain. We're against foodborne pathogens, right? But we have to remember that there's two sides to the story. It's not just the villain, right? So, Daniel, if I was to introduce a villain into a story, like let's say the big bad wolf.
Right.
If you remember like fairy tales and kid stories, what's something you associate with the big bad wolf? A story from your childhood.
They're always mean.
Right, but like another character.
Oh, other than the wolf?
Right. Big bad wolf against who? Or who encountered?
Well, Little Pigs or Little Red Riding Hood.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the two. The Three Little Pigs or the Little Red Riding Hood.
Yeah.
But when we're, for instance, when we're kids, or at any age, I guess, but when we hear the story of the Big Bad Wolf, if we're not hearing about how the Three Little Pigs were in fear of their houses being blown down, or how they decided to change their behavior to try to be proactive, the one who builds the house of bricks, for instance, kind of a thing. We don't truly understand the big bad wolf, the villain. When we don't understand the fear of the Little Red Riding Hood and what she does and how people around her react or whatever, then we don't truly understand the villain in the story. So one of the things that I have noticed now professionally is we can talk about foodborne pathogens. We can talk about, what it is that we're trying to have this food safety about. But we don't often include the Three Little Pigs or the Little Red Riding Hood, by way of we don't necessarily talk about those who become ill, those who are hospitalized, those who live with lifelong medical complications and health fears, and those families who lose a loved one because of this. And so we focus so much on the villain, that we when we miss the when we miss the picture in terms of what happens when we don't do this. What's a worst case scenario? What are the consequences of our failure in our systems and our leadership to do this? We get kind of, oh well, there's these numbers. We don't really necessarily have that difference in some cases between what we know in our minds, the facts, the data, the protocols, the laws and policies. This can tell us what's in our mind.
Okay.
What we want is we want to also make sure we're including what's in our heart. What our heart tells us. I couldn't imagine doing this wrong thing because I understand what could happen to someone. I understand the pain and suffering. I understand the agony. I understand this. I am against, you know, doing something that would cause someone to be harmed or hurt. I know that the return on investment or the cost benefit analysis tells us this, but a life is more important than our quarterly earnings statements. You know, what good are we doing if all we're focusing on is how much our stockholders will will gain in terms of quarterly profit earning statements or whatever dividends, when we're losing our consumer base, our customer base, because they don't want to eat our products anymore because they know that they can get sick or they become harmed from our products. um, Sometimes it's such this balance between, you know, profits
Right.
and all these kind of things. We have to balance that with but what is the ethical thing to do? What is the underlying thing? You know, no one ever said that they want to buy this because they want to get sick, they want to become harmed, they want this to be their last meal. No one ever says that. And same thing with our employees. No worker wants to go to work Monday through Friday, whatever. You know, no one wants to say, I work for such and such company. Sorry, you know, they're a horrible company. They kill their consumers. You know, no one wants that, right? So when we look at that, idea of balancing, let's say, our economic and legal responsibilities, even if we get up into like ethical and philanthropic responsibilities, we have to take in consideration that we're all consumers, we're all people. And when putting the bigger equation together, this idea of understanding Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people still need to be able to eat and drink and breathe and sleep. People still need warmth and security and their health. People still need family and community and part of a social group. People still need to feel, you know, that self-esteem and that self-actualization, whether they are employees or consumers.
Yeah.
And when we take away those pieces, you know, if a consumer dies, obviously they don't have those other things, but those around them now miss a piece of that bigger puzzle. And you know, you really have to look at where were your priorities, what drove your mission in terms of what you're doing, and what leadership elements led you to not um, not prioritize, you know, whether you're talking about sports safety or driver safety. You know, it's not just about food. What I'm talking about, I guess, is so generic that we have to look at what, you know, as leaders of business, as employees within the food industry, as consumers, as parents, as policymakers. How do we prioritize all this stuff and put it together? And it's not by avoiding the true burden of disease, the true human condition, um, through all of this.
Well, what you're talking about sounds like something that a lot of other advocacy groups are working on right now, which is not focusing on the financial side of it, but giving people a voice. And I think that's why a lot of organizations, administration groups are starting these advocacy committees and um, bringing us in as consumers to give our opinions to make sure that it's not just about the bottom dollar. Before you continue, let me just remind everybody you're watching Put It Together Conversation. I am your guest. I'm your host, Daniel G. Garza. My guest today is Dr. Darin Detwiler, and we're talking about um, policies and the way health administration and groups are changing. We're also talking about his book. Let me put up the photo so you guys can check this out. It is called Food Safety, Past, Present, and Predictions. And make sure you check it out. We do have a question on the board for you, so I want to bring that up for you. How can the general public translate the unending stream of statistics and dehumanizing tactics used media outlets to use to desensitize the general public to seeing that there are real people there? Good question.
That is a great question, and I think that there's probably 17 different answers I can give here, but let's break it down. One is Right now, um, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, it's hard to miss that there's a lot of conversations about critical race theory. And the irony is that critical race theory is taught in law school at university. It's not taught in public schools. But what really is taught in public schools, and I'm saying this as someone who taught for 16 years, math and science and history, is the idea of um, primary document analysis, um, evaluating credibility of sources, exploring multiple perspectives on issues, different stakeholders' perspectives on issues, to understand that when we look at a historical event and we only look at the perspective of one group of people, we're not understanding what is going on out there. So when we focus on these skills, we can also say, look, we need to focus on um, pick an event in current or distant history and say, all right, if we only look at this one newspaper, if we only look at this one media outlet, if we only look at this one social media platform, where is it in terms of the scales of bias? Is it liberal? Is it conservative? Is it in the middle? Right. We need to look at it in terms of what is the source? Um, is this a peer-reviewed a peer-reviewed journal? Is this published in a respectable, like the journal of the New England Journal of Medicine? Is this sponsored by a reputable organization or association, kind of a thing? But when we start looking at specifically these last 5-6 years or whatever, the idea that let's not believe the facts, let's not believe the science, that also hurts in how we look at these things. So it's almost impossible to turn on the news without hearing almost exactly what the question was being asked here, the idea that there's so one-sided of information. Whether you are left or right wing, conservative, liberal, red state, blue state, whatever you want to break it down, right? You're for or against something. I don't think you can be truly against something unless you explore the opposite position, right? I don't think you can be, say, oh, all this anti-smoking stuff is wrong. Well, did you explore their arguments? Did you look at their points? Did you look at the data on that side of the of the conversation? Whether you're looking at vaccinations, literally, it's like fill in the blank here. No matter what it is,
Right.
I would rather let's say that I am for something, right? I would have more respect for someone who is against something and has really done the research and has made that decision based on analysis of data and facts and that kind of a thing, than someone who actually agrees with me but doesn't know why.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
There are always going to be two sides to the story. I could say that side is wrong. It's very easy to say that, right? They're stupid. They don't know what they're talking about. But what we see time after time is, well, so what are the facts? Oh, I don't know. Well, if you don't know arguments for your position, then you're in no better of a credibility or a standpoint than the next person. So we need to, again, regardless, it could be guns, it could be anything, right? Vaccinations, smoking, whatever it is, ourselves as individuals, our children, our family members, our students, whatever it is, the people we work with, we need to look at both sides, or maybe there's more than two sides. We need to look at multiple perspectives, multiple sides of the issue, and say that there must be a reason why someone else thinks differently than I do, rather than saying they're wrong. Why don't I try to explore their position?
And you're right. Over the years, there's been, I mean, I'm 50, and I can remember let's go back, and I know this is going to sound very minimal, but it is an argument. Pepsi versus Coke, sweetener versus real sugar, carbs, no carbs. Uh, every step of the way, every generation has had one big argument over what's better and what's worse. Um, where does somebody like you come into play in those decision making or
Sure.
along the way?
So, when I first started speaking up about this, there were people who were very much against me.
Really?
Geez. Uh, well, look at this. Food is part of our coming of age, right? Fast food, you get your teenager, you get your first job, you get your first car, you're going to go with your friends, you're going to go to, out to eat kind of thing, whatever it is, right? But there was a long while, and I'm sure that many of us, even the audience here, can remember this. It wasn't just beef, it's what for dinner. It was beef. That's American.
Yeah.
Beef is, you can't be against meat because the American flag, mom, apple pie, and beef. There's nothing more American than beef. And if you're saying something against beef, then you are anti-American. How dare you insult? It's not insulting, failure within the industry. It's not insulting a company. It's not trying to help a company or a supply system or a commodity. It is, how dare you say something against this country? You are, you know, you are the bad guy because you are against us. And I was literally labeled as the dirty Harry who is against the meat industry. And at one point, I was even described as the crying mom who wears pants. Uh, Now, what I find interesting is that many of the companies that did or who would have been the kind of companies that would have done anything to avoid me back in the early, to late 90s or whatever, they readily invite me to events. They fly me out to their corporate events. They pay for me to speak to talk about this, to talk about the true burden of disease kind of things. It's a tough path. I mean, a if we focus solely on the past, we know that um, it's not very healthy,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if I was to relive that day over and over and over again for 30 years, I couldn't support that.
Mm.
And it's not effective. It's not effective, right? It's not effective for me to say, you are the bad guy, you are the bad guy, you're at fault, you're a public enemy number one. So what can I do? So what I do is I put out some facts that we can all relate to. Here are some statistics, here's some facts, here's some reality, here are some things that we know. I'll put these facts into a conceptual framework in terms of, here's when we don't prioritize the human condition, the true burden of disease. We can have big data, we can have all the data and statistics, but what we really want is actionable information. And how do we go from big data to actual information? That is the human intellect, if you will. That's understanding the human condition. And let me help you understand that. Let me tell you some
Gotcha.
stories about people who've been affected by food safety, what it was like for them, and let me tell you about how, if you go thinking that was then, they're over there, well, I'm right here, and here's how this happened to my family.
Yeah.
But then I go into my final, and I think this is the most important mode. I literally want to thank people for what they do. Um, Back in 1906, many people are familiar with The Jungle, this book written by Upton Sinclair that looked at the food industry. There was a literary review of the book that said that the things described by Mr. Sinclair, these horrible conditions in the meat processing plants at the time, the things described by Mr. Sinclair happened yesterday or happening today and tomorrow until some Hercules comes to cleanse the filthy stable. And we know there's not actually a Hercules, especially in this day of Marvel and superhero movies, right? But what we can kind of reinterpret this as is the Herculean effort an enormous amount of work, strength, and courage. And that is what my audiences need to be aware of. The fact that they are seen just as much of a hero, just as much a part of this Herculean effort as they need to see, in terms of not only the amount of work and strength, but the amount of courage that takes them to do their job, the courage it takes them to prioritize and to act upon it, to see something, say something, to do this. And they really need to understand how they are perceived as heroes, not just by children who become sick, but even by myself who lost a child, to perceive them as heroes. And here's why. So, balancing the information, providing an emotional appeal, providing them with the true information behind it, and also making sure that my audiences understand just how important what they do is and how important what they are is. That has been part of the winning recipe, if you will, for a lot of the messages that I
Yes.
deliver.
Well, just to for the audience, just to give you an idea how passionate here in the United States we are about food. Who doesn't remember 1996 Oprah Winfrey against the beef organization? Like, just one statement from her completely almost shut down the beef industry. So that just tells you. So I can imagine after that, like when you come in and say, folks, this is our new data, this is our new facts, and how people can completely turn, because let's face it, we're very good at turning facts around to make them benefit us. Let me just remind everybody before I ask the next question. You're watching Put It Together Conversations. I'm your host, Daniel G. Garza. My guest today is Dr. Darin Detwiler, and we're talking about food and facts and data that comes from being in food policy. And I wanted to ask you a question, and it kind of, as you were talking about beef particular, when you're working on policies, when you're working on making sure that everything out there is good and healthy and we're getting the best information, how does, because we are a melting pot in the United States, how does having all these different cultures, all these different foods in the country and ingredients and such, do you have a say in that, and how does it affect your work?
You know, I don't think that the different cultures, if you will, have an impact in what ways people would mostly think. I think what we realize is that, we have a food safety culture today that did not exist 30 years ago. We definitely think about food today differently than we did, before 1993. And it's interesting when there are companies that contact me and say, "Hey, will you help me, because we have people who think they don't have to wash their hands." And we never had to teach people how to wash their hands, but they do have to wash their hands. We have employees that don't understand that if they're sick themselves, they need to stay home from work. And in some cases, the health department will say, you were sick with norovirus, you have to stay home for 2 weeks. And we have companies that'll say, I'm not going to pay them to stay home. They don't want to do the earned sick leave or the required kind of sick leave kind of a thing. And in many cases, we have people that, they will stay home from that job, but they quickly go to their second job, work for some other food company, work for some other restaurant kind of a thing. We have people who don't understand that, it's one thing if you're a healthy adult, you might eat something that's bad and it's just an inconvenience for you, if it's contaminated. But they're not taking into consideration sometimes those most vulnerable populations, the very young, the elderly, those who may have a compromised immune system, those who are pregnant. And when you realize that it's like driving a car, right? If you say, well, I'm not going to wear my seatbelt because I'm willing to take that risk. Okay, but if you're willing to put everyone else in your car and everyone in all the cars around you at risk, start thinking about it that way. If you're willing to put yourself at risk in terms of, I'm going to eat a steak that's undercooked, or I'm going to eat, macaroni and cheese that I left out on the counter overnight by mistake, even though it has milk and dairy and cheese and stuff in it, right? Well, good luck with that. But if you need to understand that if you serve it to someone else, um, they may not be simply inconvenienced. Um, we have to take into consideration that there's a lot of different stakeholders that look at this issue, and I think too, maybe with cultures, is this idea of there are a lot of foods that we want to eat that are not necessarily available year round. Yet our preservation and our shipping of foods, we can get foods from other countries, other parts of the world that we just can't get here in the United States during the winter, for instance. And as we look at the diversity and the complexity of our food supply system, so too increases the vulnerability of our foods. I would imagine that you remember how the last couple of years, right around Thanksgiving in November, all the romaine lettuce outbreaks and recalls,
Hmm.
leafy greens, right? And the idea that, well, wait, we never used to think about food safety when it comes to lettuce, right? But there's a couple things that have changed. One is more Americans are likely to buy bagged lettuce that is already pre-cut. That's a problem because the more manufacturing, if you will, the more processing, the more opportunity there is for failure
Hmm.
and cross contamination. But the other thing is that the reason why the lettuce is being contaminated is because where the lettuce is grown and harvested is too close to not only where cattle are being raised, but water supplies that can be contaminated by water. And if our systems aren't set up to make sure that we're doing the right testing and the right treatment, or that we're making sure that we keep our cattle far away from our other animals are far away from the lettuce, that could minimize that. But a lot of people also don't realize that one of the big problems with lettuce, for instance, is, I don't know about you, but I don't cook lettuce.
Right.
Yeah. So when we don't cook something, then it doesn't get what's called a kill step. And many things that we cook, one of the reasons why we cook it is not only in terms of the way we like to eat it, but it's required, a required step. We have to cook it in order to make sure that anything that's bad that may be in it is rendered
Gotcha. Interesting.
harmless. So when you look at produce, when you look at how important it is, if, for instance, cantaloupe and sprouts, two of the most commonly identified culprits, if you will, of recalls and outbreaks over the last 25 years. You can't properly cook or clean a cantaloupe on the outside because of that strange kind of uh, that rind around
Yeah.
the cantaloupe. But when you put a knife through it, anything that was on the outside is now on the inside, and the pH is such that it really helps pathogens grow. Sprouts, again, like these other things, you don't cook them, and we just put them on sandwiches. Jimmy John's every other year has an outbreak tied to the sprouts they use. Sprouts have been a major source of illness and contamination and outbreaks and recalls over the last 25 years. Cantaloupe as well.
Wow.
And
Well,
now the last about
we have another question, which is kind of
great.
tied in to what you were just talking about. Maybe you can answer this. So this is pretty base question, but it has been on my mind for years. How seriously should consumers take the restaurant's ratings, ABC, etc.? I feel in my mind only that they are not legit. I think that kind of fits into what you were just talking about.
Very much so. I mean, there are restaurants who. God, this is such a lot. We need a whole other hour just for this conversation here for this one. I've been to restaurants where they have an A rating that's been up there since 2017 because they
Wow.
don't want to put up the B rating or the C rating that they got since then. There are food companies, restaurant chains, etc., that will literally fight any city government or state or whatever it is that is trying to require such ratings. They don't think, customers don't want to know. Customers don't want to know. Well, what do you have to worry about if you're passing the grade, right? We also have to take into consideration that it's just a test that's once a year, right? So what happens, just because you got an A once, hopefully they live up to that rating all the time.
Right.
But the health department may give a restaurant a rating of an A or B, an F, whatever, right? That doesn't mean that they're shut down. There was an incident a couple of years ago in Boston where this restaurant had well over 200 critical failures, like disgusting failures, and yet it was still open. It was still open. It was still operating.
Wow.
And there was a journalist who went to the restaurant and asked employees, what's up with that? And the response was, well, no, we didn't go to work, and there was a chain. The doors weren't locked shut, and a sticker that says we're closed. The health department may give those ratings, but they don't have the authority to actually close a restaurant.
Wow.
That's like the local government now, and in many cases the local government's not going to do that. So you asked earlier, how does this impact my life, kind of thing. What do I do, right? When I go to a restaurant, even if they have an A on their window, one of the things that I do is I go into the bathroom. Have you ever been to a restaurant's bathroom and it's disgusting?
Yeah.
If the restroom, which is one of the most, obvious places where customers will go into, if they can't keep that clean, I don't even want to know what the kitchen looks like,
Yeah.
or the storage room, or the refrigerator, kind of a thing, right? Not that that's the only tell, but that, to me, if I go into the restroom and I see it's dirty there, I'm walking out the door.
Yeah. I usually look at the menus. If the menu is kind of sickening. Here's another question. Is it true that there's really no regulations with regards to organic food products, and organic in quotes?
That is a yes and no. There actually is a lot of regulation in terms of labeling requirements, the certification that's needed to obtain an organic certification. Now, I will tell you this: what there's not a lot of regulation around
Regulations.
is when people talk about, like, for instance, or let's say someone says organic strawberries are better for you than non-organic strawberries, or organic oranges are better for you than non-organic oranges. How do you support that claim? And we could say the same thing about what was asked about organic in terms of kosher, GMO free, gluten free, or there's so many labels that we see in our foods today. I will tell you this: kosher is perhaps the most reputable, regulated, and taken for serious certification qualification for foods. It is very difficult to get a kosher seal of approval or stamp on
Gotcha.
foods, and if you lose it, it's almost impossible to get back. I know of
Wow.
people who kosher food is not a cultural or religious choice for them. Kosher is what their doctors recommended to them after they had a heart bypass or
Yeah.
chemotherapy, because it is so heavily regulated, kind of a thing, that it's going to actually end up being a better option for them in terms of food safety.
Gotcha. We went past the 45-minute mark, but one of the traditions on the show is to ask our guests to share some words of wisdom with the audience. So, Doctor, what words of wisdom would you like to share?
Words of wisdom. Words of Wisdom by Dr. Darin. Number one, when it comes to food safety, when it comes to vehicle safety, when it comes to gun safety, when it comes to vaccinations, whatever it is, it kind of is a generic way to apply this. Don't think about yourself until you've thought about others. How would your children, how would your parents, your grandparents, your neighbor, your sick employee, your pregnant sister, your struggling to recover uncle, whatever it is, ask yourself about other people's needs and perspectives in terms of you being thinking about yourself within a silo in terms of the decisions you make. I think that many times you'll find that when you take the few minutes to think about how others would be impacted by your decision, your pause will allow you to step aside from just yourself in terms of, and I'm not saying that it's selfish or that it's you're not actualizing those around you kind of a thing, but I think that too many of the flare-ups in terms of controversial issues and polarizing political viewpoints, perhaps we could minimize these diverse set of actions and opinions if some people simply thought about how others are impacted by their decisions or actions.
Gotcha.
Um, Words of wisdom number 2. Don't go thinking that you're going to be measured by what happened to you or defined by what happened to you. Perhaps it's better to think of, at the end of your life, at the end of the day, whatever, you're measured by your reaction, by how you respond, by how you put it together, if you will. What did you do in response to this? If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you clearly didn't learn a lesson. If you changed, perhaps one could see what was the motivation, what was the process behind why you changed your actions or your opinions over time. That's what I would want to be measured on, if
Cool.
you will. And I think the final thing really quickly is this idea of especially for younger audiences and people trying to figure out, what are they doing with their lives? Number one, the number one thing that anyone should do is figure out what's important to you. What is your passion? What is your I've heard it called different things. What is your cheesecake? What is the flag? What is the hill you want to die on? What is the flag you want to wave? Whatever. But if you can understand what's important to you, if artistic expression is important to you, if supporting others is important to you, if whatever it is, right? Use that to measure, what you do as a student, what you do as an employee, what you do in terms of your career search. Because if you are staying in a job that you cannot connect to that which is important to you, then you're most likely not going to be staying in that job long. You're not going to be happy. You're not going to be productive. And I think that, when you look at the message that those around you get from, how you react to your job, that should be a good indicator that perhaps you need to reevaluate what you do.
Cool. We have one last question just before we go.
One last question.
Just to clarify, organic does not mean non-GMO, correct?
That is correct. There's a lot they're two different things. Um, um, you really need to look at what those definitions are. Another area of confusion is cage-free and free range. They sound like different things, but people don't necessarily know the difference of it. You can be certified organic, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're certified non-GMO.
Gotcha.
Or you can be certified non-GMO. It doesn't necessarily mean you're organic. That's a great question. I remember recently being in a grocery store, and there was someone who was doing the where like you go online and you say, here's my shopping list, and then someone shops for you and delivers it to your house. I don't know what platform they were using, but there was this guy. He was like literally asking me, what's the difference between this and this and this? This says, it says local, it says organic, it says free range, it says non-GMO, it says all these different things. And what's ironic is that those words were big fonts, right? But in little font, it said turkey, and he's like, I can't tell if this is chicken or turkey. And what is it? It's like before it was, is it boneless or not? Or is it this or not kind of a thing? There are so many different labels and certifications now that take up a great amount of real estate on labels. It is just as like you were talking before about information and how to make sure that we have all the facts. Same thing with labels on food. We need to take that opportunity. There are people who have food allergens. Is it peanut free? Yes, but you go into the ingredients and realize that
It's got other stuff, yeah.
there actually is peanuts in this,
Mm.
kind of a thing. Critical piece of
All right.
information.
Well, I want to remind everybody the book is Food Safety, Past, Present, and Predictions. Go check it out. It's on Amazon and find it. You can also go find him on his Twitter account. Dr. Darin Detwiler, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for coming on and sharing.
You are welcome.
I feel like we could do a whole other show just answering like really specific questions about organic and GMO and local and free range. So we might have to have you back on the show if you'd be interested to come back.
Maybe so. One of those other questions people ask me all the time is what's glucose, and what's gluten, what's a calorie. There's a lot of words that get thrown out there that people don't even know what it is.
Well, I hope you accept the
very, very great
invitation.
topic.
Yeah, I hope you accept the invitation to come back and do another episode just on terms.
Let's plan on that.
Excellent. So let me put you in the green room, and I'll be back for you in just 1 second. I want to remind everybody we are here every week, all week actually. Come check us out every Wednesdays with the Christian and Daniel show, on Fridays the Car Devo, and on Saturdays with 2 episodes of Put It Together Conversations. Every once in a while we sneak in an episode like today. So make sure that you follow us so that you can get notified whenever a new episode is on. Remember, we're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So make sure you subscribe and hit those notification buttons so you get notified for every new episode. And not on the schedule is my TikTok show, which is every Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Come check it out. My book is out. I'm sure you hear about it because I talk about it every episode. It's Scorpy Bunny and the Colors Game. It's a guided meditation for kids, but it's good for all ages. So make sure you go any one of these 5 locations and find the book. Go check it out. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to thank my guest, Dr. Darin Detwiler. Make sure you go check out his book. Check us out. Follow us. And remember, Put It Together Conversations is a show about you, where you come from, where you are now, and what your journey has been like. And the idea is to motivate and inspire other people to go after their dreams and goals. I hope today's conversation has inspired and motivated you. We will see you next week. Bye.